The ruthless mafia boss made me admit I was his lover. Angelina Toley adjusted her cocktail tray in the employee locker room of the Crimson Vault, her fingers trembling as she fastened the black silk uniform that left little to imagination. The fabric clung to her curves like a second skin, the neckline plunging deep enough to make her breath hitch. 10 minutes. She had exactly 10 minutes to transform from investigative journalist to the kind of temptation that would bring Chicago's most dangerous man to his knees. "Stay focused," she whispered to her reflection in the dim lighting. The uniform's corset-style bodice lifted her breasts in a way that felt both empowering and obscene. Auburn hair swept into an elegant updo that exposed the vulnerable column of her throat. Exactly what Nikolai Madrov's profile said made him lose control. Hi friends, if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, please click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I'll be giving you another story as interesting as this one so you don't miss it. Alrighty, now let's keep going. Green eyes that held secrets no one could see, rimmed with smoky shadow that promised sin. Her burner phone buzzed in her locker. She almost ignored it, but her editor's code flashed on the screen, sending ice through her veins despite the heat pooling low in her belly. Tonight. Get close. Whatever it takes. He has a weakness for women who challenge him. Angelina's hand found the small recording device hidden in her bra strap, nestled between breasts she'd been told to weaponize. 2 years of preparation, a career built on exposing corruption, all leading to this moment. One mission: expose Nikolai Madrov from the inside out and bring down the empire that had murdered her mentor. But the message that followed made her blood run cold. Your sister sends her regards. She's waiting. Don't disappoint her. Angelina's breath caught. Her sister was dead. Had been for 5 years, she'd been told. Killed in a car accident that was ruled suspicious but never investigated. Unless. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath against the revelation trying to claw its way up her throat. Just another performance. You've been performing your whole life. Figure out the lies later. But when she opened them again, the woman staring back looked like a stranger. Maybe because that's exactly what Angelina Toley was. A carefully constructed lie wrapped in designer lingerie and red lipstick. Walking into the lion's den with secrets even she didn't know she carried. Her phone buzzed one final time. He's asking about the new girl. Specifically asked for you by name. He knows something. Be careful. How could Nikolai Madrov know her name? She'd used an alias for the application, unless someone had told him. Unless this entire mission was compromised before it even began. Angelina allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of fear before shoving the phone back into her locker, arranging her face into the practiced seductive confidence expected of crimson girls, and stepping through the employee door into the main floor. The opulent interior of the Crimson Vault hit her like a physical force. All dark leather, crystal chandeliers, and the scent of expensive cigars and older money mixed with something more primal. Testosterone, power, danger. This was Nikki's kingdom, and she was about to become either his biggest mistake or his perfectly laid trap. The club's main floor thrummed with barely contained power and sexual tension. Not music. The jazz quartet in the corner played something low and sultry, but the kind of power that came from men who controlled the city from the shadows and took what they wanted without asking permission. Angelina recognized faces from her surveillance photos. Nikki's lieutenants, all of them watching her with the kind of hunger that made her skin prickle. His business partners, both legitimate and otherwise. Rival family representatives here for carefully orchestrated negotiations that probably involved more than just territory. And there, in the private booth that overlooked everything like a throne, sat Nikolai Madrov himself. The photographs hadn't prepared her. In surveillance images, he'd been handsome in a cold, calculating way. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that missed nothing. The kind of face that belonged on a Fortune 500 CEO rather than a crime boss. In person, he was devastating in a way that made her thighs clench involuntarily. Not just handsome, but magnetic in a way that felt dangerous, primal, like standing too close to a predator that was deciding whether to devour you slowly or quickly. He wore a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than her real monthly salary, midnight blue, that matched the almost black of his hair. But it was the way he wore it that made her pulse race. The jacket open, vest hugging a body that clearly didn't get that physique from sitting behind a desk. Everything about him screamed controlled, unleashed violence. From the way his long fingers caressed his whiskey glass to the measured way his dark eyes tracked every movement in his domain. When those eyes landed on her, Angelina felt it like a physical touch. Hungry, assessing, knowing. New girl, Victor, the floor manager, grabbed her elbow with fingers that bit too hard, breaking the spell. "You're on VIP section. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't make eye contact unless he tells you to. And whatever Mr. Madrov wants, and I mean whatever, you smile and deliver. Capus." The implication was clear. Her body was part of the service. "I know the rules," Angelina said, her voice coming out huskier than intended. She pulled free with just enough resistance to seem confident but not insubordinate. Victor's eyes traveled down her body in a way that made her want to shower. "Mr. Madrov doesn't usually like chatty girls, but word is he specifically requested you by your real name. Angelina." His grip tightened. "So who the hell are you and what game are you playing?" Her blood turned to ice. Her real name, not her alias. Her real name. Someone had betrayed her before she'd even begun. But who? Her editor? The newspaper? Or had Nikolai Madrov somehow known she was coming all along? If only you knew that I'm asking myself the same question. But Angelina just smiled, the practiced seduction sliding into place like armor. "I'm very good at being whatever the customer needs, and I don't ask questions I don't want answered." The words tasted like ash and arousal in equal measure, because that was the truth, wasn't it? She'd been whatever her career needed her whole life. The perfect student, the obedient intern, the girl who studied investigative journalism and criminal psychology while other kids played soccer. Also, she could infiltrate and destroy the organizations that preyed on the innocent. She'd been trained in more than just journalism. Her mentor, before his murder, taught her how to read people, how to use her intelligence as effectively as her appearance, how to make a man like Nikolai Madrov trust her badly enough to let his guard slip. But no one had taught her what to do when the target knew her real name, when her supposedly dead sister was somehow still alive and waiting, when the mission felt less like infiltration and more like she was walking into a trap with her eyes wide open. She'd always had a choice. But as she made her way across the floor toward Nikolai Madrov's booth, feeling his dark eyes track her movement with predatory interest that sent unwanted heat pooling between her thighs, Angelina felt something shift in her chest. A whisper of rebellion. A question she'd never dared ask before. What if exposing him isn't justice? What if it's just another story I'm telling myself to justify what I'm about to do? The answer terrified her more than any crime boss ever could. Because somewhere in the 2 years of preparation, Angelina had started to wonder if destroying Nikolai Madrov was about her murdered mentor, or about something darker inside herself, a need to prove she could take down the untouchable. And now, with her real identity exposed, and her sister apparently risen from the dead, she wondered something even more dangerous. What if Nikolai Madrov isn't the monster I came to expose? What if I'm the one walking into a story where I'm not the hero? When she reached his booth and their eyes finally met, his dark and knowing, hers defiant despite the fear, Nikolai Madrov smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards and was enjoying watching someone else realize they'd been playing a rigged game all along. "Angelina Tolley," he said, her real name a caress and a threat. "I've been expecting you. We have so much to discuss about your investigation, starting with your sister and why she sent you to expose me." The recording device between her breasts suddenly felt like a countdown timer to her own destruction. Chapter 1. The Infiltrator 6 weeks earlier. Angelina Tolley had stood in the offices of the Chicago Tribune, reviewing leaked documents on organized crime with the kind of detached professionalism that came naturally after years of practice. Her colleagues knew her as the ambitious investigative journalist who stayed late, volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, and had a particular obsession with dismantling the city's criminal enterprises. What they didn't know was that every lead she followed, every connection she mapped, every weakness she identified in law enforcement's approach, all of it was building toward one target. The man who'd ordered her mentor's death, the ghost who operated in plain sight while the city pretended not to see, Nikolai Madrov. Thinking too much. Her editor's voice had been cold that night in the parking garage, 3 days before she'd applied to the Crimson Vault. James Chen, not just her editor but the man who trained her since her first internship, handed her a manila folder thick with intelligence. "The position opens Friday. You apply Saturday. You start Monday." Angelina had opened the folder to find everything she needed. A perfectly crafted alias, employment history at upscale establishments that would check out under scrutiny, even references from managers who'd been paid enough to remember a girl who'd never actually worked for them. But it was the photograph paperclip to the front that made her hands shake. Nikolai Madrov caught in a rare moment of laughter at some charity gala, looking nothing like the monster she'd been researching for 2 years. He's the reason Daniel is dead, James had reminded her, as if she could forget the story that had consumed her life. Madrov controls the judges, the prosecutors, half the police force. He's untouchable through conventional journalism. Now you get inside. You get evidence we can actually print. The words had echoed in her mind during the interview, when Victor, the floor manager, had looked her up and down like merchandise and asked if she was comfortable with high-profile clientele. Smiled and said all the right things, knowing that her application had already been flagged, that Nikki's people had already run background checks that would find exactly what they were supposed to find. A young woman with expensive tastes and journalism school debt, ambitious enough to work in a place where the tips came with strings attached. She got the call 24 hours later. Now, standing in that locker room with her real identity exposed before she'd even begun, Angelina realized the game had changed. Nikolai Madrov knew her name. Her supposedly dead sister was alive and waiting. And the recording device pressed against her racing heart felt less like a tool for justice and more like evidence of her own deception. The main floor was a study in controlled chaos. Girls in uniforms like hers moved between tables with practiced grace, their smiles never quite reaching their eyes. The clientele ranged from tech moguls to men whose faces she recognized from FBI watch lists. Everyone here had secrets. Everyone here had something to lose. Angelina had researched Nikolai Madrov obsessively. Born in Belarus, brought to Chicago at age 5, elevated to boss at 26 after his predecessor's assassination. A hit that had never been solved, but left a power vacuum Nicky filled with ruthless efficiency. In the 12 years since, he transformed the Madrov organization from a traditional crime family into something more insidious. Legitimate businesses fronting for money laundering, tech investments that allowed digital surveillance of rivals, even media connections that controlled the narrative around his activities. He was 38 now, never married, no children on record, rumored to be ruthless with enemies and dangerously charming with everyone else. The FBI had tried to flip his lieutenants for years without success. He inspired the kind of loyalty that came from fear and fascination in equal measure. And he was watching her. Angelina felt his gaze like a physical touch as she moved through the crowd, balancing her tray with the kind of practiced ease that suggested this wasn't her first rodeo. She'd trained for this, not just the cocktail service, but the performance of being someone who belonged in his world, someone worth noticing. When she finally allowed herself to glance toward his booth, their eyes met across the smoky room. For a moment, everything else fell away. The jazz quartet, the murmur of conversations, the clink of glasses, just her and the man she'd come to expose, locked in a silent exchange that felt like the opening move of a chess game neither of them was certain they could win. Nicky raised one hand, a subtle gesture that somehow commanded absolute attention. Victor materialized at her elbow instantly. "Mr. Madrov wants you at his table," the floor manager said, his earlier suspicion replaced with something that looked almost like pity. "Whatever he asks for, you deliver." He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "And Angelina, he doesn't ask for girls by name unless he has plans for them. So smile pretty and remember, you wanted this job." Angelina lifted her tray, her pulse thundering so loud she was certain everyone could hear it. She'd prepared for this moment for 2 years. She knew exactly what to say, how to act, what to do to make Nikolai Madrov trust her badly enough to let her into his world. What she hadn't prepared for was the predatory satisfaction in his smile as she approached, or the way her traitorous body responded to the heat in his dark eyes. "Angelina Tolley," he said softly as she reached his booth, and hearing her real name from his lips felt like a door slamming shut on any hope of escape. "Please, sit down. We have so much to discuss." Chapter 2. The claim Angelina slid into the booth across from Nikolai Madrov with the kind of practiced grace that suggested she did this every night, when in reality her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear the jazz quartet over the rush of blood in her ears. Up close, he was even more devastating. the sharp planes of his face softened only by the faintest lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from years of measuring threats in the dark. "Macklin neat," she said, setting his drink down with steady hands. "Though I suspect you already knew I'd get your order right." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know a great many things, Angelina. The question is, what do you think you know about me?" Before she could answer, two men approached the booth. Angelina recognized them from her research files. Ivan Volkov and his nephew Dmitri, representatives from the Volkov family that controlled the South Side. The way Nikki's jaw tightened told her this wasn't a social call. "Madrov," Ivan said, his eyes sliding to Angelina with undisguised interest. "Heard you were breaking in new talent. Didn't realize you were shopping in such high-quality merchandise." Word merchandise made Angelina's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. This was the world she'd signed up for, the world her mentor had died trying to expose. "Mr. Volkov." Nikki's voice dropped several degrees. "I don't recall inviting you to my table." Being neighborly. Ivan's nephew Dmitri moved closer, his hand reaching toward Angelina's shoulder. "Maybe when you're done with her." Nikki was out of his seat before Dmitri's fingers made contact. His movement so fluid and fast that Angelina barely registered it before he had the younger Volkov pinned against the booth, one hand wrapped around his throat. The entire club seemed to hold its breath. "Touch what's mine," Nikki said softly, his voice carrying despite its quiet intensity, "and I'll feed you your own fingers." He released Dmitri with enough force to send him stumbling. "She's mine now. Spread the word." Angelina's pulse raced for entirely different reasons as Nikki settled back into his seat, adjusting his cufflinks as if he hadn't just publicly claimed ownership of her. The Volkovs retreated with murder in their eyes, and Angelina knew with certainty that she'd just been painted with a target. "That was," she started, but Nikki cut her off. "Necessary. You'll understand soon enough." He lifted his glass, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Tell me, Angelina Tolley, with the Northwestern journalism degree and the fake employment history, what exactly did your editor promise you in exchange for this suicide mission?" Her blood turned to ice. He knew everything. The journalism degree she'd hidden, the fabricated background, the newspaper connection, which meant he'd known before she'd even walked through the door. This entire night had been a game where she was the only one who didn't know the rules. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said automatically, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Insult my intelligence." Nikki leaned forward. His scent, expensive cologne and something darker, more primal, overwhelming her senses. "I've known about you since you started investigating me 18 months ago. Did you really think I wouldn't notice when my most persistent journalist suddenly decides to serve me cocktails?" The conversation continued through the evening, Nikki asking seemingly casual questions that Angelina answered with carefully constructed lies. Both of them engaged in a dance where every word carried double meaning. He introduced her to his inner circle. Alexei, his head of security, a man who looked at her like she was a bomb about to detonate. Katia, his financial advisor, who had the soulless eyes of an accountant who'd buried more than just money. And Yuri, his cousin and the only person at the table who smiled at her with something approaching warmth, though his eyes held the same sharp intelligence as Nikki's. By midnight, when Angelina's shift finally ended, her feet ached and her mind spun with fragments of overheard conversations. Territory disputes. A shipment coming through the ports. Names she'd need to remember for James if she lived long enough to report them. The parking garage was dimly lit and echoing, her heels clicking against concrete as she made her way to her car. She almost didn't hear them until it was too late, footsteps behind her, moving fast. Dmitri Volkov and two men she didn't recognize. Madrov's little journalist, Dmitri snarled, grabbing her arm hard enough to bruise. "Let's see if you're worth all that posturing." Training kicked in, the self-defense classes she'd taken religiously after Daniel's murder. Angelina drove her elbow into his solar plexus, twisted out of his grip, and was reaching for the pepper spray in her purse when the first gunshot cracked through the garage. Dimitri's head snapped back, blood and brain matter painting the concrete wall behind him. The other men dropped before they could even draw their weapons. And then Nicky was there, his gun still raised, his expression carved from ice and fury. "In the car," he said, his voice eerily calm despite the bodies at his feet. "I can," Angelina started, but he cut her off with a look. "You can get in the car, or you can explain to the police why you're standing in a parking garage with 3 dead Volkovs. Your choice." Angelina got in the car. Nikki's penthouse occupied the top floor of a building on the Gold Coast with views that stretched from Lake Michigan to the glittering downtown skyline. Angelina registered marble floors, modern art that probably cost more than her real yearly salary, and floor-to-ceiling windows before Nikki had her pressed against the wall, his body a solid line of heat against hers. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, his hands bracketing her face. "Who sent you? Your editor. Your sister who's supposed to be dead. Or are you here on your own, trying to be the hero who finally exposes me?" Angelina should have lied, should have maintained her cover. But with his body pressed against hers and her heart racing from adrenaline and something far more dangerous, the truth spilled out. "Of the above," she whispered. "But mostly, I don't even know any more." Nikki's kiss was brutal and claiming, nothing gentle or tentative about it. Angelina kissed him back with equal ferocity, her fingers tangling in his hair, her body arching into his despite every warning screaming in her head. This wasn't the mission. This was suicide. But when he pulled back, his thumb tracing her swollen bottom lip, Angelina saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not the monster she'd been researching. Not the ruthless crime boss who just killed 3 men without blinking. Just a man who looked as lost and conflicted as she felt. "Stay," he said roughly. "Not because I'm claiming you, not because you're my possession, but because out there you're dead. In here you have a chance." Angelina knew she should refuse, should run, should call James and report everything. Instead, she nodded and sealed her fate. Chapter 3. Crossing lines. Living with Nikolai Madrov was like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Beautiful and calm on the surface, but surrounded by constant swirling violence. Angelina woke in silk sheets that cost more than most people's rent, ate breakfast prepared by a private chef, and watched Nikki conduct business over espresso that involved words like collection, shipment, and problems solved in tones that made her stomach twist. By day 3, he'd given her access to his home office. "If you're going to report back to your editor," he'd said with dark amusement, "at least give him accurate information. I'd hate for him to waste time on outdated intelligence." Angelina didn't know if he was testing her or genuinely didn't care, but she took advantage anyway. Financial records showing legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, a tech startup, all carefully layered over the money laundering operations beneath. Shipping manifests for the ports, names and photographs of his entire organization, everything the Tribune would need to build a story that could finally expose him. She photographed it all with shaking hands, uploaded it to an encrypted server, and hated herself a little more each time. The family dinner happened on her 5th night. Nikki's inner circle gathered at a River North restaurant that closed to the public after 10, transforming into something more intimate and infinitely more dangerous. Angelina met his cousin Yuri properly this time, a man in his 30s who ran the legitimate side of operations with a kind of sharp business acumen that would have made him a Fortune 500 CEO in another life. Alexei, his head of security, still watched Angelina like she might pull a knife at any moment. And then there was Alina, Nikki's aunt, the aging matriarch who'd helped raise him after his parents died in the crossing from Belarus. "So you're the girl who's got my nephew distracted," Alina said, her English heavily accented, her eyes weighing and measuring. "Beautiful, yes, but beauty is cheap. What else do you offer?" "Conversation," Angelina replied smoothly, meeting her gaze. "Nikki seems to appreciate a woman who can think as well as look decorative." Alina's laugh was genuine. "She has teeth. Good, you'll need them in this life." Later, after too much wine and too many stories about Nikki's childhood that made him seem human in ways Angelina couldn't afford to acknowledge, they drove along Lake Shore Drive with the windows down and the city lights glittering beside them. "My father used to bring me here," Nikki said quietly, his hands steady on the wheel of his Mercedes. "After we first arrived in America, he'd drive until the sun came up, trying to convince himself we'd made the right choice leaving everything behind." Angelina turned to look at him, his profile stark against the lake lights. "How old were you?" 5. His jaw tightened. "He died when I was 14. Heart attack, they said, but I learned later it was poison. A rival family's welcome to Chicago." The pain in his voice was genuine, unguarded. And suddenly Angelina saw him differently, not as the untouchable crime boss, but as a boy who'd lost everything and built an empire just to feel safe again. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and meant it. It made me who I am." He pulled over at a vista point overlooking the lake. "Strong enough that no one can hurt me again, or so I thought." He turned to face her fully. Then you walked into my club with your fake name and your real eyes, and I realized I'd been lying to myself. Nikki, I know why you're here, Angelina. I know about your mentor, Daniel Reeves. I know he was investigating me when he died. His voice dropped. What you don't know is that I didn't kill him. Angelina's blood froze. What? The Bratva, the Russian mob. They killed him because he stumbled onto their operation while researching me. They framed it to look like my work. Nikki pulled out his phone, showing her files, photographs, evidence. I've been trying to bring them down for 2 years. Your mentor was collateral damage in a war he didn't even know he was fighting. World tilted. Everything she'd believed, everything she'd built her investigation on. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Because you needed to see me as the monster. It was safer for you that way. His hand cupped her face. But I'm tired of being safe. I'm tired of watching you photograph my files and pretend you're not falling for me the way I'm falling for you. This is insane. Is it? His thumb traced her lips. Or is this the first honest moment we've had? Her burner phone buzzed. James's message was brief. Timeline accelerated. Upload final evidence tomorrow or pull out. Angelina looked at the message, then at Nikki, then did something completely unexpected. She laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, gasping, slightly hysterical laugh that made Nikki stare at her like she'd lost her mind. What's funny? This, she gestured wildly between them. I'm supposed to be exposing you. You're supposed to be the villain. My sister is somehow alive. My mentor was killed by the wrong criminals. And I'm sitting here in a car with a man who just confessed to, wait, did you just say you're falling for me? I believe I did. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Probably. We've known each other 5 days. Point. Angelina kissed him then, laughing against his lips, tasting wine and absurdity and something that felt dangerously like hope. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nikki's expression had transformed into something she'd never seen before, genuine, unguarded joy. So, he said, adjusting his tie with shaking hands. Does this mean you're not going to publish the story? Oh, I'm definitely publishing a story. Angelina grinned wickedly. Just not the one my editor expects. Chapter 4. The real enemy. The next morning, Angelina woke to find Nikki already dressed, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression darker than she'd ever seen it. Duh, understood. No, I'll handle it personally. He ended the call and turned to her, and whatever softness had been there the night before was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a man who'd survived in a world that ate the weak. Dressed? We have a problem. 20 minutes later, they were in Nikki's private office, surrounded by his inner circle. Alexei, Yuri, Katya, and 3 men Angelina didn't recognize. And sitting in a chair in the center of the room, bound and bloodied, was James Chen. Angelina's world stopped. Your editor, Nikki said softly, has been working for the Bratva for 3 years. Every story you wrote, every lead you followed, you were doing their work for them, eliminating their competition while they stayed in the shadows. That's not, Angelina started, but James's bitter laugh cut her off. Oh, it's true, Angie. Did you really think a second-rate journalist like you got those leads through good reporting? His face was a mask of contempt. I've been feeding you information for years. You were my useful idiot. Room spun. Daniel was getting too close to the truth, so I made sure he had an accident. James smiled through broken teeth. The Bratva paid well, better than journalism ever did. Angelina felt Nikki's hand on her shoulder, steadying her as the foundation of her entire career crumbled. There's more, Katya said, pulling up files on the screen. Your sister Melissa isn't dead. She's been working with Chen, using your guilt to manipulate you. She's outside right now, actually waiting to rescue you. As if on cue, the door burst open, and a woman Angelina hadn't seen in 5 years ran in, older, harder, but unmistakably her sister. Angie. Thank God I found you. Melissa stopped short when she saw James, bound and beaten. What the hell is this? The truth, Nikki said coldly. Would you like to tell your sister how you faked your death, or should I? What followed was the most surreal 30 minutes of Angelina's life. Her sister, alive and furious, screaming about betrayal. Her editor, bloody and defiant, laughing about how he'd manipulated them all. Nikki's people, calmly presenting evidence of a conspiracy that made her head spin. And through it all, one absurd thought kept running through Angelina's mind. I'm in love with a mafia boss, my sister faked her death, my mentor's killer is tied to a chair, and I still haven't filed my story. When the chaos finally settled, James and Melissa taken away by people Angelina decided not to ask about, she found herself alone with Nikki again. So, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I've been an unwitting pawn in a mob war. My entire career has been a lie, and the only honest person in my life is the crime boss I came here to expose. Essentially, yes. You're still falling for me, helplessly. Angelina laughed again, that same slightly unhinged sound from the night before. Then I guess we're both idiots. Matching set, Nikki agreed and pulled her into his arms. Outside, Chicago glittered in the morning sun, oblivious to the fact that somewhere in a Gold Coast penthouse, an investigative journalist and a crime boss were figuring out that sometimes the truth was stranger and funnier than any fiction they could have imagined. Chapter 5. Empire of Truth. The conference room at the Peninsula Hotel overlooked Michigan Avenue, but the view was wasted on the 5 family representatives who'd gathered for what Nikki called a territorial clarification. Angelina stood slightly behind his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that broadcast partnership as clearly as the emerald necklace he'd fastened around her throat that morning. She wore Armani, deep green because Nikki had a wicked sense of humor, and every eye in the room had tracked her entrance with varying degrees of curiosity and calculation. "Gentlemen," Nikki said smoothly, his fingers finding hers where they rested on his shoulder. "You know Angelina, my partner. She'll be sitting in on all future negotiations." The word partner sent ripples through the room. Not girlfriend, not mistress. Partner in this world, that meant power, access, trust that could get a man killed if misplaced. Ivan Volkov's replacement, a wiry man named Sergei, leaned forward. "Your predecessor never brought civilians to the table, Madrov." "My predecessor is dead." Nikki's voice carried steel beneath the courtesy. "I'm not interested in repeating his mistakes." The meeting dragged through territorial disputes and profit-sharing arrangements, the kind of bloodless negotiations that mask the violence simmering beneath. Angelina memorized every detail, not for a story anymore, but because this was her life now. These men, this world, this impossible situation she'd stumbled into, she was so focused on the financial projections that she almost missed it. The subtle shift in Sergei's posture, the way his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Training kicked in before conscious thought. Angelina's heel caught his wrist as he drew the gun, her other hand grabbing the champagne bottle from the ice bucket and bringing it down on his skull with enough force to shatter crystal and bone. Sergei crumpled. His gun clattered across marble. 5 of Nikki's men materialized from the shadows, weapons drawn before the other family representatives could even process what had happened. Nikki stood slowly, his expression carved from ice. "Gentlemen, it appears the Volkovs have forgotten the terms of our ceasefire." He stepped over Sergei's groaning form, his hand finding the small of Angelina's back. "My partner just saved several of your lives. You're welcome." Ride back to the penthouse was silent, Nikki's jaw tight with controlled fury. But once the door closed behind them, he pressed her against it, his forehead resting against hers. "You could have been killed. So could you." Angelina's hands fisted in his shirt, feeling his heart racing against her palms. "I wasn't going to let that happen." The question was raw, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard from him. "You're supposed to want to expose me, remember? This would have been the perfect story, crime boss assassinated at peace talks." "I love you." The words came out before she could stop them. Because somewhere between the lies and the manipulation, this became real. Nikki pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes searching hers with devastating intensity. "Say that again." "I love you, Nikolai Madrov. I love your terrible sense of humor and your ridiculous overprotectiveness and the way you pretend you don't care about things when you care about everything." She laughed, slightly breathless. "I came here to destroy you, and instead you destroyed every wall I'd ever built." His kiss was different this time, not claiming or desperate, but tender. Like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. They made love on the floor of his office, surrounded by the files and financial records that had once been her target. Her dress rucked up around her waist, his shirt hanging open, both of them too desperate for each other to make it to the bedroom. Afterward, tangled together on Italian leather and expensive wool, Nikki traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "About why I really brought you in that first night." Angelina's blood cooled slightly. "I'm listening. I knew about your investigation for months, but it wasn't until I saw your photograph, the one in your Northwestern ID from 8 years ago, that I realized something." He pulled out his phone, showing her an image. "Do you remember this?" It was a coffee shop, campus area. Angelina stared at the photo, herself at 22, laughing over a latte with a dark-haired man she'd forgotten about until this moment. "Spring semester, senior year," she whispered. "I met a guy at a journalism ethics seminar. We talked for hours about truth and responsibility, and—" She looked up at Nikki, her heart stopping. "That was you. Different name, different life. I was trying to go legitimate then, taking business classes under an alias." His smile was bittersweet. "You told me that the only thing that mattered was exposing the truth, no matter the cost. That journalism was about holding power accountable." Angelina's hands trembled. "I remember. You said that sometimes the truth destroys more than it saves." We argued. 3 hours. Best conversation I'd ever had. Nikki's thumb traced her jaw. "Then my uncle was murdered and I had to become what I'd been trying to escape. I never forgot you, Angelina. Never forgot the woman who believed the world could be better if people just told the truth. So when I showed up at your club, I wanted to see if you were still her, the idealist who believed in redemption." He kissed her forehead. "Turns out you are. You just needed someone to believe in first." Chapter 6. The trap tightens. Angelina stared at the encrypted message on her laptop, her blood turning to ice. "Your sister wants to meet. Grant Park, noon. Come alone or she disappears again." It had been 3 days since Melissa had been taken away by Nikki's people. 3 days of Angelina trying to reconcile the sister she'd mourned with the stranger who'd helped manipulate her for years. "It's a trap," Nikki said from the doorway, 2 coffee cups in his hands. "Melissa doesn't work alone anymore. The Bratva are using her to get to you." "I know." Angelina accepted the coffee, letting its warmth ground her. "But she's still my sister. I need to hear her side." "Then I'm coming with you," said Alone. "Don't care what she said." Nikki's voice was flat, brooking no argument. "You're not walking into an ambush without backup." They compromised. Angelina would meet Melissa while Nikki's people surrounded the area at a distance. Close enough to intervene, far enough to stay hidden. Grant Park at noon was crowded with tourists and locals enjoying the spring weather. Angelina spotted her sister by the Buckingham Fountain, looking thinner than she remembered, harder around the edges. "Angie." Melissa's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You came. You faked your death. For 5 years, I mourned you." Angelina's voice was steady despite the rage bubbling beneath. "Why?" "Because I was weak and you were strong. Because Mom and Dad always loved you more, the perfect daughter with the perfect career." Melissa's laugh was bitter. "James offered me a way out, money, freedom, a chance to be someone other than your shadow. All I had to do was help him manage you." "Manage me?" "Keep you focused on the wrong targets. Make sure your investigation never looked too closely at the Bratva's operations." Melissa stepped closer. "But then you had to go and fall for Madrov. You always did have terrible taste in men. He's a better person than you ever were. He's a criminal, Angie. And you're a journalist who's forgotten what she stands for." Angelina said quietly. "I finally figured out what I stand for, truth. But real truth, not the convenient story someone feeds me to serve their agenda." Melissa's expression shifted, something almost like regret flickering across her face. "They're going to kill you, you know. The Bratva, they can't let you and Madrov expose what James was really doing." "Them try. Always so brave." Melissa pulled out an envelope. "These are documents, everything James had on the Bratva's operations. Bank accounts, shell corporations, names of every corrupt official on their payroll. Consider it my apology." Angelina took the envelope cautiously. "Why?" "Because you're still my sister, even if I don't deserve to be yours." Melissa's eyes glistened. "And because I'm tired of being someone else's weapon. Maybe it's time I learned from your example." Before Angelina could respond, the first gunshot cracked through the air. Nikki's security team materialized instantly, returning fire as Bratva operatives emerged from the crowd. Melissa shoved Angelina behind the fountain's concrete base, her own weapon drawn with professional efficiency. "Stay down," Melissa barked, providing cover fire. "I've got your 6. Firefight was brief but intense. When the smoke cleared, 3 Bratva soldiers lay dead. 2 of Nikki's men were wounded, and Melissa was gone, disappeared into the chaos like a ghost. Nikki reached Angelina seconds later, pulling her into his arms with barely controlled panic. "Are you hurt?" "No, Melissa, she saved me. And she gave me this." Angelina held up the envelope, now spattered with someone else's blood. "Everything we need to bring down the Bratva." Back at the penthouse, surrounded by Nikki's inner circle, they reviewed Melissa's documents. Names, dates, transactions, enough evidence to dismantle the Russian mob's Chicago operations completely. "This is bigger than we thought," Yuri said, his face grim. "Half the city's infrastructure is compromised. Judges, police captains, even some FBI agents." Which means we can't go to the authorities, Katia added. Not without knowing who we can trust. Angelina looked at Nicky, seeing her own realization reflected in his eyes. They'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than either of them had imagined, a conspiracy that made their complicated relationship seem almost simple by comparison. So we do it ourselves, Nicky said finally. We expose them all, but we do it smart. He turned to Angelina, taking her hands in his. This is what you've always wanted, the story that changes everything. Are you ready? Angelina thought about her mentor, dead because he'd gotten too close to the truth. About her sister, broken by years of lies. About the idealistic journalist she'd been at 22, arguing with a stranger in a coffee shop about the cost of truth. I'm ready, she said. Let's burn it all down. Chapter 7. The proposal. The rooftop garden overlooked the entire city, 1,000 lights glittering like fallen stars beneath them. White roses everywhere, hundreds of them, their scent almost overwhelming in the warm evening air. A single table set for two, candles flickering in crystal holders. A string quartet playing softly from the corner. It was everything Angelina had never known she wanted. Everything she'd never believed she deserved. Nicky wore a tuxedo that transformed him from dangerous crime boss to something else entirely. A man capable of tenderness, of romance, of building something beautiful from the violence of his world. He pulled out her chair, his fingers lingering on her bare shoulders as she sat, and Angelina felt the weight of Melissa's documents in her clutch like a stone pressing against her heart. Been thinking about what to say, Nicky began, his voice rougher than usual as champagne was poured into crystal flutes. Rehearsed it a dozen times, but now, looking at you, he shook his head, something almost like wonder crossing his features. Words aren't enough. He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. A ring materialized from his pocket, a flawless emerald surrounded by diamonds that caught the candlelight, throwing prisms across his face like scattered hope. Built an empire on fear and calculation, on being harder, colder, more ruthless than anyone else. And then you walked into my club with your fake name and your real mission, and suddenly none of it mattered. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You make me want to be better, not just legitimate but good. The kind of man who deserves someone like you. Angelina's throat closed. The documents in her clutch, evidence that could bring down the Bratva but also expose Nicky's organization to unprecedented scrutiny, burned like accusation. And Nicky, beautiful, trusting Nicky, was offering her everything. I'm offering you complete partnership, he continued. Not just my name, but real power. Half of everything I own, equal say in every decision. I want to build something with you, Angelina. A life, a legacy, something we can be proud of. Nicky, her voice broke. Love you, he said simply. I know this is insane. I know we've only known each other 3 weeks. But I loved you 8 years ago in that coffee shop, and I've been looking for you ever since. So marry me. Choose this. Choose us. Choice crystallized with brutal clarity. She could use the documents, expose everything. The Bratva and Nicky's world, destroy the corruption but also destroy the man she loved. Or she could choose him, choose this impossible love story, and risk letting the truth die in the shadows. The only thing that matters is exposing the truth, no matter the cost. Her own words from 8 years ago haunted her. I can't marry you, Angelina whispered, watching his face transform from hope to confusion. Not without telling you everything first. She opened her clutch, pulling out the documents and setting them on the table between them like an offering. These are from Melissa, everything on the Bratva, but also connections to your organization. Names of people in your own family who have been working both sides. Stared at the documents, his expression going very still. If I publish this, it brings down the Bratva, but it also exposes you, your people, everything you've built. Tears streamed down her face. And I don't know how to be both things, the journalist who tells the truth and the woman who loves you. So I'm choosing honesty. I'm giving you the choice. She stood, her legs shaking. You can destroy these documents, protect your empire and the people loyal to you, or you can help me publish everything knowing it might destroy us both. Either way, I need you to know, I love you more than I've ever loved anything, but I can't marry you with this lie between us. Nicky rose slowly, his face unreadable. He picked up the documents, flipping through pages that listed names Angelina recognized from his dinner table. His jaw worked, and for a terrifying moment, she thought he might throw them over the edge of the roof. Instead, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. Do you know what I realized the night you walked into my club? He set the documents down carefully. That I was tired. Tired of the violence, tired of the lies, tired of being the monster everyone expected me to be. He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. You want to publish this? Then we publish it, all of it. We expose the Bratva, we expose the corrupt officials, and we expose every person in my organization who's been playing both sides. Your empire was built on blood I've been trying to wash off for years. His smile was bittersweet. You told me once that the truth matters more than anything. Time to see if I believe it. Angelina's breath caught. You're serious. Completely. But his expression hardened. We do it my way. We don't just drop this information and hope for the best. We coordinate with the few honest people left in law enforcement. We protect the innocent people caught in the crossfire. And we make damn sure we survive long enough to see it through. He pulled her close, the ring still in his hand. So here's my real proposal. Marry me, partner with me, and let's tear down this corrupt system together. Then we build something new from the ashes, something clean that we don't have to hide from. That's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Probably. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Is that a yes? Angelina looked at the emerald catching the candlelight, at the documents that could destroy them both, at the man who'd just chosen truth over survival. Yes, she whispered. Let's burn it all down. His kiss tasted like hope and champagne and the kind of reckless courage that changed the world. They never saw the sniper until it was too late. Chapter 8. Blood and Choice. The bullet hit Nicky in the shoulder, spinning him away from Angelina as chaos erupted around them. His security team materialized instantly, returning fire toward the adjacent building while Angelina dropped beside him, her hands pressing against the wound that was bleeding far too much. Stay with me, she commanded, her journalist training kicking in. Assess, prioritize, act. Alexei. Get a medic up here now. Nicky's laugh was wet-pained. Of course someone tries to kill me the night I propose. Terrible timing. Up, save your strength. But her hands were shaking, blood seeping between her fingers despite the pressure she applied. More gunfire erupted. The Bratva had sent a full assault team, 6 men breaching the rooftop access, professional and coordinated. They wanted the documents, and they wanted Nicky and Angelina dead. Yuri appeared at her side, his own weapon drawn. Get him to the service elevator. I'll cover you. I'm not leaving. You're his fiancé now. Act like it. Yuri's expression was fierce. Protect what's yours. Angelina helped Nicky to his feet, his weight heavy against her as they stumbled toward the elevator. Behind them, the firefight intensified, Yuri's precise shots dropping 2 attackers while Alexei and his team engaged the others. In the elevator, descending too slowly, Nicky's blood stained her dress crimson. The documents were still in her clutch, somehow miraculously intact through the chaos. If I die, Nicky said, his voice fatting, publish everything. Promise me. You're not dying, I won't let you. Angelina. No, she pressed harder on the wound, fury overriding fear. You proposed to me 30 seconds ago. You don't get to die before we even have our first dance. His laugh turned into a cough. Bossy, I like it. Elevator doors opened to the penthouse, where Katia had already prepared an emergency medical setup. She'd been a combat medic before joining Nicky's organization, a fact Angelina had never been more grateful for. Bullets still in there, Katia assessed quickly, her hands efficient and steady. I can extract it, but it's going to hurt like hell and he needs a hospital. No hospitals, Nicky ground out. Bratva has people everywhere. They'll finish the job. Then we do it here. Angelina squeezed his hand. I'm not leaving you. What followed was the longest hour of Angelina's life. Nicky's screams as Katia extracted the bullet without anesthesia. They couldn't risk anything that would compromise his alertness with assassins still hunting them. The steady reports from upstairs as Yuri's team secured the rooftop. The awful waiting to see if the bleeding would stop. Through it all, Angelina held Nicky's hand and whispered stories about the future they'd build together. The newspaper they'd start, dedicated to real investigative journalism. The foundation they'd create for victims of organized crime. The life they'd have once this war was over. Delirious, Nicky mumbled, his skin too pale. Optimistic, there's a difference. Finally, blessedly, the bleeding slowed. Katia's hands worked with methodical precision, stitching and bandaging. When she finally stepped back, exhaustion lined her face. He'll live. But he needs rest, antibiotics, and absolutely no excitement for at least a week. Don't have a week, Alexei said from the doorway, his face grim. We just got word the Bratva is moving against all our operations simultaneously. They're trying to wipe us out in one night. Angelina felt Nicky try to sit up, immediately pressing him back down. You heard Katia, no excitement. My people are dying, and you'll join them if you don't rest. She turned to Alexei, Yuri, and Katia. What do we need to stop them? The three exchanged glances. Yuri spoke first. We need to cut off their leadership. They're coordinating from a warehouse in Pilsen. We've known about it for months, but never had enough firepower to take it. What if we didn't use firepower? Angelina pulled out her phone, scrolling to a contact she'd been saving for exactly this moment. What if we used the truth instead? She showed them the screen. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to James, she'd verified. One of the few federal agents Melissa's documents confirmed was clean. We give her everything, Angelina said. The documents are testimony, real-time intelligence on the warehouse. She gets the biggest bust of her career, and we get federal protection while the Bratva's leadership gets arrested. Be exposing ourselves, Katia said slowly. Everything we've done, everything Nikki's built. Everything Nikki's built was supposed to be temporary, Angelina interrupted, looking at the man she loved lying pale and bloody on the makeshift operating table. He's been trying to go legitimate for years. Maybe this is how. Nikki's hand found hers, his grip weak but steady. Do it. Call your FBI friend. Let's end this. The next 6 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. Agent Chen arrived with a small team of agents she personally vetted. Angelina walked her through the documents while Nikki's people provided real-time surveillance on the Bratva warehouse. This is enough to take down half of Chicago's criminal infrastructure, Chen breathed, scrolling through the files. You realize you're both going to need witness protection after this. We realize, Nikki said from the couch, where he was ignoring Katia's orders to rest. Worth it. The raid happened at dawn. FBI teams coordinated with the few honest Chicago PD officers, hit the warehouse and 12 other locations simultaneously. The news coverage was immediate and explosive, the biggest organized crime bust in Chicago history. Angelina watched it unfold on television, sitting beside Nikki on the couch, their fingers intertwined. On screen, reporters scrambled to understand how the FBI had suddenly obtained years' worth of evidence on the Bratva's operations. Her phone rang. An unknown number. Answer it, Nikki warned. But Angelina already knew who it was. Hello, Melissa. You did it. Her sister's voice was thick with emotion. You actually burned it all down. Both did. Your documents made this possible. A long pause. I'm proud of you, Angie, for what it's worth. It's worth something. Angelina's throat tightened. Where are you? Somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. Melissa's laugh was sad. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to face you again. Until then, be happy. You've earned it. Line went dead. Nikki pulled Angelina closer, careful of his bandaged shoulder. Around them, his people, the ones who'd chosen to stay, the ones who'd decided that loyalty to Nikki meant following him into legitimacy, were already planning their next moves. So, Angelina said softly, we're engaged, you're wounded, we're probably wanted by every surviving Bratva member in the city, and we just destroyed your criminal empire on national television. Sounds about right. To hear something crazy. Always. Never been happier in my life. Kissed her temple, his lips warm against her skin. Me either, even with the bullet wound. Especially with the bullet wound. It makes you seem vulnerable, I like it. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Marry me soon before someone else tries to kill us. Deal, but first. Angelina picked up her laptop, her journalist's fingers already flying across the keys. I have a story to write, and this time I'm putting both our names on the byline. Outside, Chicago woke to a new day. One where the old order was crumbling and something new, something honest, had a chance to grow from the ruins. Inside, a crime boss and a journalist wrote the truth together, blood-stained and beautiful and impossibly real. Chapter 9. Queen of the Underworld. 6 months later, Angelina stood in the offices of the Chicago Truth, the independent newspaper she and Nikki had founded with the remnants of his legitimate business holdings. The walls were covered with awards their exposé had won, alongside photographs of the 53 arrests that had followed their testimony. But it was the small frame on her desk that mattered most. A faded photograph from 8 years ago, recovered from Nikki's old apartment. 2 students in a coffee shop, laughing over lattes, unknowingly falling in love before life had pulled them apart. Still can't believe you kept that, she murmured, touching the glass. I kept everything, Nikki said from the doorway, moving with only the slightest hitch from his healing shoulder. That napkin you wrote your number on, which you never answered when I called, by the way. The article you published about journalism ethics, every story you wrote for the Tribune. That's either romantic or stalkerish. Definitely both. He pulled her close, his hands settling on her waist. Speaking of which, Special Agent Chen called. The last of the Bratva leadership took a plea deal this morning. It's over, Angelina. Really over. She sagged against him, relief flooding through her. 6 months of looking over their shoulders, of sleeping with one eye open, of wondering if the next knock on the door would be assassins or federal marshals. What about your people? Yuri, Alexei, Katya? All clean. Witness protection if they want it, or fresh starts with new identities. Nikki's smile was bittersweet. Turns out when you give people a choice between loyalty to a dying empire and a chance at a legitimate life, most choose life. Alina, your aunt, retired to a villa in Greece. She calls every Sunday to ask when we're giving her great-grandchildren. He pressed a kiss to her temple. She's very persistent. Angelina laughed, the sound genuine and free in a way it hadn't been for years. One thing at a time, we haven't even had the wedding yet. About that. Nikki pulled back, his expression suddenly serious. I know we've been putting it off because of the trials and the threats and everything else. But Angelina, I don't want to wait anymore. I've already lost 8 years with you. I'm not losing another day. Heart clenched. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a judge downstairs, Judge Martinez, one of the few honest ones left, who owes us a favor. And Yuri's got a marriage license with our names on it. And if you're willing. He took her hands, his dark eyes bright with hope and certainty. We could be married in an hour. That's insane. I believe we've established that insanity is kind of our thing. Angelina thought about the girl she'd been at 22, so certain that truth was black and white, that justice was simple, that the world could be divided into heroes and villains. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred by loss, hardened by betrayal, but somehow still capable of love. And she thought about the man in front of her, who'd chosen truth over empire, who'd taken a bullet meant for both of them, who'd kept her photograph for 8 years like a promise he couldn't make but refused to break. Yes, she whispered. Let's do it. Let's get married right now. The ceremony was nothing like the elaborate rooftop proposal. Judge Martinez married them in the newspaper's conference room, with Yuri and Katya as witnesses. Alexei stood guard at the door. Old habits died hard, while Alina video-called from Greece, crying happy tears and shouting blessings in Russian. Angelina wore the green dress from their first real date. Nikki wore the same tuxedo from the proposal, now cleaned of blood but still carrying the memory of that night. When Judge Martinez asked for vows, Angelina spoke first, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I was raised to believe in truth above all else, that exposing corruption was the highest calling, that justice required sacrifice. But you taught me something different. You taught me that truth without love is just cruelty, and that the most courageous thing we can do is choose redemption over revenge. She squeezed his hands, feeling the calluses from years of violence alongside the gentleness he'd shown her from the beginning. I vow to be your partner in everything, in building this newspaper, in raising our future children, in creating something beautiful from the ashes of what we destroyed. I vow to always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. And I vow to love you every day, not despite who you were, but because of who you chose to become. Nikki's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke. 8 years ago, I sat in a coffee shop with the most brilliant woman I'd ever met, and she told me that the world could be better if people just had the courage to demand it. I didn't believe her then. I thought I was too far gone, too stained by the life I'd inherited. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. But you never stopped believing. Not in the truth, not in justice, and somehow, impossibly, not in me. You saw past the monster everyone expected and found the man I'd been trying to become. His thumb traced the emerald ring on her finger. I vow to spend every day earning the faith you placed in me. I vow to build a legacy we can be proud of, not an empire of fear, but a life of meaning. I vow to protect you, cherish you, and remind you every single day that you're not just a journalist or my wife. You're the woman who saved me from myself. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Judge Martinez said, smiling through her own tears. Mr. Madrov, you may kiss your bride. Kiss was tender and fierce, full of promise and relief and the kind of love that survived bullets and betrayal and impossible odds. When they pulled apart, Alina's voice crackled through the video call. Finally, now about those great-grandchildren. One thing at a time, Aunt Alina, Nikki laughed. 1 year later, Angelina stood at the window of their new home, a brownstone in Lincoln Park, far from the penthouse that held too many memories of violence. She cradled her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with a daughter they'd already named Alina Rose, after the aunt who taught Nikki that family meant protection, not possession. The latest edition of the Chicago Truth sat on the kitchen table, its headline reading, "Former crime boss testifies before Senate Committee on Organized Crime Reform." Nikki's photograph was front page, but it was the byline that made her smile. By Angelina Madrov and Nikolai Madrov, co-publishers, they'd built something real from the wreckage. The newspaper was thriving, funded by anonymous donors, former criminals seeking redemption through supporting honest journalism. Nikki had testified before Congress 3 times now, using his insider knowledge to help reform laws that made it easier for people to leave criminal organizations. And Melissa, beautiful, broken Melissa, had finally come home. She was in therapy now, working through years of trauma and manipulation, living in their guest room, slowly rebuilding the sister relationship they'd lost. "You're thinking too much again," Nikki said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers on their daughter's strong kicks. Just remembering. The coffee shop, everything, the coffee shop, the club, that insane rooftop proposal. She leaned back against him. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we actually survived. Did more than survive. We won." He turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Do you have any regrets about the story you wrote exposing everything?" "About marrying me?" Angelina thought about the question carefully. About Daniel, her mentor, whose murder had started this whole journey. About the career she'd thought she wanted, built on taking down criminals at any cost. About the woman she'd been, so certain of her righteousness, so blind to the complexity of human nature. "No regrets," she said finally. "Only gratitude for the second chance, for finding you again, for learning that truth and love aren't enemies, they're partners. Even though I was the ruthless mafia boss you came to expose, especially because of that, you made me admit what I'd been denying from the moment I walked into your club, which was that I was already yours, that I'd been yours since that coffee shop 8 years ago, that love doesn't care about missions or investigations or carefully constructed lies." She pulled him down for a kiss. "Pretending I didn't love you might have been the hardest performance of my life." Nikki's laugh was warm against her lips. "And here I thought infiltrating my organization was the hard part. That was easy. Admitting I was in love with you, terrifying." Their daughter kicked again, as if agreeing with her mother's assessment. They both laughed, hands pressed against Angelina's belly, feeling the new life they'd created together. Outside, Chicago glowed in the evening light, a city healing from years of corruption, slowly learning to trust again. Inside, a former crime boss and an investigative journalist held each other close, living proof that people could change, that love could redeem, that the truth was always worth fighting for. Angelina's phone buzzed with a message from her editor at The Truth. Breaking story: 3 more officials arrested in connection to the old Bratva network. "Need your input for tomorrow's edition." She smiled, already reaching for her laptop. Some things never changed. The work continued, the fight for justice never ended. But now she didn't fight alone. "Partners?" Nikki asked, settling beside her with his own laptop. "Always," Angelina replied, and together they began to write the truth, blood-stained and hard-won and impossibly, beautifully real. In the distance, the city lights sparkled like the emerald on her finger, a promise kept, a love earned, a future built from the ruins of their violent past. She'd come to expose a monster and found a man instead. She'd planned to destroy an empire and built a family instead. She'd believed in truth above all else and learned that sometimes the greatest truth was simply this: love was the most ruthless force of all. And when it claimed you, completely and without mercy, the only choice was to surrender and let it transform you into something better than you'd ever dreamed you could be. Angelina Madrov, formerly Toli, leaned against her husband's shoulder and smiled. She'd made her choice. And she'd do it again, 1,000 times over. The END epilogue 5 years later. Alina Rose Madrov sat in her father's old office at the Chicago Truth, carefully arranging her crayons while her parents worked at their desks nearby. At 4 years old, she already showed signs of inheriting her mother's determination and her father's tactical mind, a combination that both delighted and terrified her parents in equal measure. "Mama," she asked, looking up from her drawing, "Papa says you and him met when you were trying to investigate him." "What's that mean?" Angelina and Nikki exchanged glances, years of partnership allowing them to communicate without words. "It means," Angelina said carefully, kneeling beside her daughter, "that sometimes the people we're supposed to see as enemies become the people we love most. and that the best stories are the ones where everyone gets a second chance. Like in my fairy tales. Exactly like that. Except in our story, the princess saved herself, and the dragon learned to be a prince. Rose nodded seriously, as if this made perfect sense. When I grow up, I want to write stories like you and Papa. Then we'll teach you, Nicky said, scooping his daughter into his arms. But first, you have to learn that sometimes the most important truth isn't the one you find in files and evidence. It's the one you find in here. He tapped her chest, right over her heart. As the sun set over Chicago, the Madrov family left the office together, walking hand in hand toward home, toward dinner, toward the beautifully ordinary life they'd fought so hard to earn. Behind them, tomorrow's edition was already being prepared. Another story of truth and justice. Another step toward the world they were building for their daughter. The ruthless mafia boss had made Angelina admit she was his lover. But pretending had stolen both their hearts, and in losing them, they'd found something far more valuable than either truth or empire. They'd found each other. And that was the greatest story of all.